The Ruy Lopez is one of the most challenging openings for black in the king's pawn game, especially if you don't know how to respond against it. In this video, I'm going to show you the most simplest way to handle the Ruy Lopez or counter it. So make sure to watch this video up to the end and leave a comment in the comment section down below. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. White simply wants to capture your queen's knight, which is the only piece defending the e5 pawn. Frankly speaking, the Ruy Lopez is one of the most confusing openings out there, and that's why you don't see many beginners playing it. But anyway, from here I have two different variations for you guys to pick. It's up to you to choose which one you prefer the most. Number one, you can respond with the Berlin defense with knight f6, which is the trappiest line, as you are going to see. Number two, if you want to be positional and just play the main lines, you can go with the Morphy defense with pawn to s6. Let's start with the most tricky Berlin defense with knight f6. When I play the Berlin, my main goal is to transpose to the Mortimer gambit. At this point, all I am praying for is my opponent to play pawn to d3. And they do this in an effort to protect their e-pawn. Once I see pawn to d3, I immediately go knight c e7, which is the Mortimer variation, by the way. The whole idea is to shift the queen's knight to the king's side and play in the style of the Nimzo. Now, say what if white takes the pawn on e5? Well, now you can simply go pawn to c6, and wherever that bishop goes, you simply go queen a5 check, and you are guaranteed to win a free piece from here. But not too fast. Even after winning a piece, you still have to work for your meal, as the game may become so tricky. For example, sometimes white may play an intermediate move after noticing that they are going to lose a minor piece in this position. Instead of playing either bishop a4 or bishop c4, they might start with knight c4, which is another tricky move. So if you just go ahead and take that bishop, you will smoother mate yourself like this. That'll be painful. So if your opponent ever plays knight c4, you want to finish your knight maneuver by playing knight g6. This is where you intended your knight to be, and next after bishop a4, that's when you go pawn to b5. That's how you win one of those minor pieces. e5, just an example, you go knight d5. End of line. Now, once again, after you successfully manage to trap your opponent in this manner, don't think you are going to win easily. I repeat, this is the most important statement you need to hear from me. You still have to work for your meal. White still has some tricky moves, and they may end up being 2 or 3 pawns for a piece. For example, most advanced players here will sacrifice their knight on f7, attacking your rook and your queen. So the best you can do here is to take, quite alright, and only then do they go bishop c4. This comes with check. Instead of playing pawn to d5 in this position, you can also try king e8. It works. And white may even run into this simple trick if they are not careful. We go queen a5 check to win back that pawn, and that'll be an automatic win for you. So even king e8 is playable. That's why most advanced players here just end up castling. And now this is when you go pawn to d5. The key is just to open up the position. If pawn takes, you take back with your c pawn and start developing your pieces. Normally you'll be okay. Just exchange as many pieces as you like. They play bishop b3 to maintain their advantage. Now see the difference here. Your king is not pinned, which is why I love playing king e8 most of the time. So you just take, and if pawn takes, oversimplifying the game is key, because the more pieces you trade, the more chances you have to win, since you're going to remain with very few pawns on the board and an extra piece. Again, after playing king e8, if white rushes out with pawn to a4, you can always rely on pawn to d5. Bishop b3, pawn takes. That's it. Next, you want to exchange queens. See, after this knight sack and king takes, then bishop check. The only reason why I don't really like pawn to d5, even though it's very much playable, is due to this annoying pin. It means we have to lose the tempo in this position, and oftentimes we're going to be giving back a piece to equalize the game. But anyway, if you choose to play like this, just ensure that your light squared bishop is on e6. That's it. So the way I love continuing from here is playing bishop g4 first, inviting pawn to f3 so that I prevent white from playing queen f3. After this, that's when I go bishop e6, intending to take. I still have to deal with pawn to e5. From here, knight d7 is the move you want to play, attacking that. They play pawn to d4. And once you play knight f5, that's it. So this is another good line to try. But I love the king e8 line, which I just showed you, due to its simplicity. So key number one in the Mortimer Gambit after winning a piece is looking for ways to exchange queens as early as possible. Key number two, opening up the position immediately with a move pawn to d5. That's my advice. Back to the initial position of the Mortimer trap. Instead of bishop a4 or knight c4, the other move you will see is bishop c4 in this position. But again, you can just go queen f5 check. They have nothing better to do than playing knight c3, after which you just take with queen takes e5. Again, don't be too excited. As long as white has these center pawns that may attack your pieces, you will still have to work for your meal. For example, in this position, they can play pawn to f4. My advice is to look for ways to exchange queens very early. See, the more you exchange these bigger pieces, the more you're going to remain with pawns only and an extra piece. So you want to do this. Queen h5, asking for a queen trade. If they take, well and good, you take back. If pawn to g4, you just go back, knight f6. If g5, you play knight back to h5. But don't be too defensive and play pawn to d5 as quickly as you can to open up the position. That's what is important, opening up the position. After queen h5, asking for a queen trade. If white says no to that queen trade, again, open up the position as quickly as you can with a move pawn to d5. That's your savior. If pawn takes, that'll be well and good. You take back with your c pawn. If bishop b3, which they like doing, again, the key is opening up the position, looking for queen trades. So you can start with pawn takes, and after pawn takes, you go knight g6 or anything that makes sense. Pawn to e5, you have knight g4. If they play something like knight e4, maybe trying to give you a check, you have bishop e7. And next, you're going to cast a short bet. You still have to work for your meal. When you face a lot of pressure, giving up a piece is not much of a stretch. To equalize material, you are going to have a lead in development. Again, after winning a piece like this, instead of playing pawn to f4 immediately, white may just castle short. You can go queen h5 to oversimplify the game, getting rid of the queen. Or first go pawn to d5 to open up the position. If pawn takes, you take back with your c pawn. I love knight g4 to threaten checkmate in one. They play pawn to g3 or pawn to f4. Now this is when I play queen h5. Still wanting to checkmate. Pawn to h4. That's when I take on d5. Same stuff, just a little bit of shuffling. But anyway, so what I'm saying is when you play the Mortimer Gambit and successfully win a free piece in this manner, don't be too overexcited. You still have to work for your meal and see how you equalize the position. I mean, white still has all the pawns on the board. They are going to do you bad with their center pawns. And in positions like this, where white manages to cast a short and ready to go pawn to f4, again, start looking for ways to exchange queens very early. I'll push pawn to d5 immediately to open up the position. So this is just a random Mortimer position where I would go queen h5 first. If white says no to my queen trade offer, I'll then play pawn to d5. Yes, just to open up the position. This also paves the way for the bishop. Yes, the pawn on c6 is pinned, but after pawn takes and knight e takes d5, knight takes can be met with queen takes. If rook e1 check, an intermediate move, I have all sorts of moves like bishop e7 or even better bishop e6. I might even consider to castle long. Once the position is opened like this, it's now guaranteed that you are indeed up a piece. Random position number 2, where you need to look out for an immediate queen exchange, is this one on the board. Instead of castling short, white may rush out with pawn to f4 immediately. Again, look out for a queen trade. Once you manage to exchange queens, the game will be simpler. Your next pawn break should be pawn to d5. Again, if white says no to that queen trade, just go pawn to d5, even if you don't know what the hell you're doing. This also paves the way for your last squad bishop. If pawn to e5, you have moves like knight d7, that's playable. Even pawn to d4 in this position. But I love knight g4. This also comes with another threat. If pawn to h3, there goes queen h4 check, and say king f1. Even though I have knight h6, the rook is still pinned, so I can just play knight f5 in this position, and there are all sorts of things going on. But anyway, after queen h5, if white accepts the trade, just take. If they play pawn to g4, just play knight f6. Again, you're just looking for the right time to play pawn to d5 as quickly as you can. Pawn to g5, knight h5, pawn to f5, g6 is also playable. Even pawn to h6 right away. I would also consider playing b5 here. Right after bishop b3, I go pawn to b4 and d5 next. Also h6, threatening to capture right away. If pawn to f6, I'll go knight g6, end of line. So that's how you continue playing in the Mortimer variation after managing to win a free piece in this manner. Now we're still looking at the Ruy Lopez bishop b5 move. It is not always that your opponents will play pawn to d3 and blunder that piece in one. Sometimes after pawn to d3 and knight e7, you won't see your opponents taking on e5. Most advanced players know this trap already. Instead, you will see them developing their queen's knight to c3 or playing castle short. After any of those moves, let your next move be pawn to c6. You want to chase that bishop away. Right after something like bishop a4 or bishop c4. Now that's when you complete your knight maneuver with knight g6. Also protecting the e5 pawn. Say rook e1, in the Ruy Lopez, it is always safer to put your dark squared bishop on e7. You're not doing anything on c5. One of the reasons why bishop c5 is always bad in the Ruy Lopez is this knight sack. Although in this position it works, so just play bishop e7 to avoid anything. By the way, if pawn to d4, up to you to play pawn to d6 and exchange queens as highlighted on the board just to play it safe. But if you want to keep the queens on the board, which is riskier, you have to consider playing queen c7 and hope to run into this line where you win a free bishop, which won't happen against higher rated opponents. So never be afraid of exchanging queens. If you have to, as black, you have limited options. Another move you may consider to play after d4 is, simply taking. Tactically speaking, rook takes will run into pawn to d5 and you'll get back your piece. So once more, that's how you handle the Mortimer variation if white doesn't fall for your dirty trick by taking what appears to be a free pawn. If they castle short or if they play knight c3, just play c6. c6 is the savior, and oftentimes you're going to be having the following position on the board where they play bishop a4, you go knight g6, completing your knight maneuver. Then they play rook e1, you go bishop e7, they play c3 or knight c3, then you castle short. Your d pawn will go to d6, your queen will go to c7, you'll play h6 given a chance, you'll play bishop g4. This is how you're going to be playing your Mortimer variation if white doesn't fall for your dirty trick on e5. Now we conclude with the most challenging line in the Mortimer variation, the main line Berlin defense after knight f6, where white just castles short. Now, this is called the Ruy gambit, where white sacrifices their e-pawn in the hope that you take, and then they play pawn to d4, and that's all fantastic, and it oftentimes leads to the famous drawish line in the Berlin defense. But since you are an average player or a beginner, I want to propose something very simple for you. Instead of taking on e4 and run into those drawish lines and tactical lines, just simply play bishop e7. Yes, even this is very much playable. It looks like white can now safely get rid of the defender of your e5 pawn like this and take it, but one cool knight maneuver you need to get used to in the Ruy Lopez is this one that I have highlighted on the board. As long as your dark squared bishop is on e7, you are safe to take on e4, and this is why we always want to put our dark squared bishop on e4 in the Ruy Lopez. Jot that down. So here you can just play knight takes. After rook e1, you go knight c5. Your knight will come back to this square of the board. They play knight c3 or knight f3, after which you may even castle short if you want, or play knight e6 to complete your knight maneuver, or in this position play bishop g4, first pinning that knight to the queen. After h3, you go bishop h5, still pinning that, also provoking a weakness. Oh, this rook e5, you just go bishop g6. If pawn to b4, for example, just go knight e6. This is where your knight belongs. End of line. Play bishop f6 or castle short or bishop d6, all up to you with your plan. Still in the second reply of the Berlin defense, white castles short instead of playing pawn to d3. Once again, just play bishop e7. In short, let your first four moves be the two knights defense and bishop to e7 in the Berlin defense, so that if knight takes, you take like that and put your knight to e6. As long as your bishop is on e7, you can take on e4, then put your knight on e6. Say why not playing moves like bishop c5, the way we do it in the Italian? Well, once again, you have to deal with uncomfortable moves like knight takes e5. Even though this is still playable, point is, if you take back, white will rush out with pawn to d4, getting back their piece, and I mean, they're just going to be controlling the center of the board with their 2 pawns. Still playable, but very tricky to handle, especially that pawn to e5 is coming, and rook e1. So just avoid playing bishop c5 in the Ruy Lopez. Normalize playing bishop e7 so that on the next move, it becomes possible for you to play these highlighted moves on the board by taking on e4. So what happens if bishop takes happens? You just take back, then do that. If rook e1 is played first, wait a second. This is another challenging line that most beginners get confused with. Of course, the main move is pawn to d6 in this position, but after d4, things may be confusing for black. And I mean, your knight is pinned. Even if you take, you can take back or play pawn to e5, confusing you further. If you take back, you then take back with the knight like this. I mean, you just keep on defending. All this is playable. But the thing is, these kinds of lines can well be understood by advanced players. Quite confusing at beginner level. So what I advise to do, instead of playing pawn to d6 when white plays rook e1, is to play knight d4. Before I continue, let me run you through the opening moves once again so that you do not get confused. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, the Berlin defense, hoping to play the Mortimer variation like that, but white castles short. I said let your 4th move be bishop e7, not bishop c5. If they take, well and good, you take back because you know you have knight takes e4, knight c5, and knight e6. Bingo. If they play rook e1, instead of playing pawn to d6, let your next move be knight d4 as a beginner. By playing this move, you are introducing a whole new game which is going to resemble the Alekhine defense, as you are going to see. Point is, white can take the e5 pawn due to knight takes b5. Will be good, and we're going to play that move. Knight d4, knight c6. So after you play knight d4, the move you're going to see oftentimes is knight takes. And after pawn takes, they are going to be playing pawn to e5 most of the times. Which is why I said, from here you're going to play in the style of the Alekhine defense. With the move knight d5 now. Point is, after bishop c4 or something like that, you now have knight b6 attacking that bishop. Bishop b3, castle short. The game is now well simplified and very easy to understand at beginner level. d3, d6. Want to get rid of that pawn for good. Pawn takes. I wouldn't mind taking back with the queen. Nothing wrong with bishop takes. Next you have bishop h4. If queen f3, by the way, let me show you the last trap for today. After this position on the board, let your next move be bishop d7. Temporarily sacrificing your pawn on b7. If white doesn't take, you will simply play bishop c6 and life goes on. But if they take, it is time for you to start celebrating, as white may lose their queen in no time. Of course, the main move is queen h4, but it's not going to be clear what you're going to do after pawn to g3, which is why I love the move c6 in this position. This almost traps the queen. I would do this if I'm playing against Magnus Carlsen or Hikaru, and maybe I just want to get a quick draw or have a lead in development. Point is, after a lazy move like pawn to g3, for example, I would play rook b8. If queen takes, I would play rook a8. If queen b7, I'll play rook b8. If that, I'll play, I mean, just a funny draw. But anyway, this shouldn't be a draw, because after queen a7, you can simply go c5. That won't happen, but I just wanted to make a point. So once white takes your b7 pawn for free, just go pawn to c6. There's a high chance you're going to trap this queen. For example, after queen a6, you have queen h4 intending to take here. If they play pawn to g3, now here is your point. You play queen h5. And all of a sudden, that queen has no safe square to go to. If you think about it, they can't play queen a5 due to that. I mean, they can't do anything in this position. If they play something like knight d2, now you go bishop c8. That's how you trap this queen. Anyway, that was just a funny line after queen f3. Otherwise, you don't really need to sacrifice your b7 pawn. If you are risk averse, you can play queen h4. After g3, you go queen h3. Just simple chess. If queen g2, you have queen h5. If bishop f4, you have bishop g4 first. White has has no time to take the b7 pawn. Due to that, if queen g2, you have queen takes, king takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. White has a bad pawn structure. Then you go rook f e8, trying to oversimplify the position before doing that and this. So this was to say, in the Berlin defense, if white castles short on move number 4, start thinking of the improved Aleheim defense with the move knight d4 after playing bishop e7. Bishop e7 is very crucial in that it allows you to place your knight on e6 in case of bishop takes. But if something like rook e1, feel free to go knight d4. If knight c3, once again you can go knight d4. Since after knight takes e5, you still have knight takes b5 and that, then knight takes, knight c5 and that. This time, if rook e1, you can just go knight f6, followed by castle short. Since it's very easy to see that knight c5 will be made by d4, then that will come and so knight f6, queen e2, and castle short, then that. Alright, that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. In my next video, I'll show you how to play the Murphy defense against the Ruy Lopez, which features the move pawn to s6.